Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Elzie, and thank you so much for giving up your day, part of your day, to come down here. It's so gorgeous in the area, all over the area, and you've given up part of that time to come down and share with us, and you will be very, very happy. Our upcoming speakers, I should say, John Ryan and John Joseph, are going to share with you a symphony of ocean sounds. It's incredible. It's amazing. It's something that you probably wouldn't hear too many other places. Very few other places, right? You know, but they'll tell you where. Okay, John Joseph from the Naval Postgraduate School. John Ryan from Stanford. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. The Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, and a fine organization. And but please don't tell Julie about that. And so this is something you wouldn't hear anywhere else. These gentlemen don't go speak to the public all the time. It's a very, very special occasion. I'm going to shut up and make it all happen right now. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's yours.
Good afternoon. My name is John Ryan.
I'm John Joseph.
Yeah, John and John. We work together studying Monterey Bay, particularly through the use of sound. And so, yes, as was introduced, you'll get a chance to hear some of the sounds recorded right here in Monterey Bay. Being that this is Whalefest, we thought an appropriate title was The Ocean Soundscape is a Whalefest, because you will hear many species just by putting a microphone in the water. To start with a note of gratitude, we are fortunate to work with a lot of people in this project. At MBARI, there's the whole team. I could work with engineers and marine operations people to get things working in the ocean. Very grateful to all them. And we have a number of regional collaborators from different institutions. So I just want to acknowledge and thank them. I know one of them is here. I can do this. Mark Fisher. Mark should be here in the audience. Mark introduced me to the world of sound just a few years ago. It's a wonderful world, and here we go into exploring it. Let's begin with the deep philosophical question that the young master: why? Why listen? Well, you know, the ocean is Earth's largest habitat, and it's largely dark. If you were to swim down from the surface of Monterey Bay, maybe go down 50 feet, most of the light would be gone. And in contrast, sound travels much farther in the ocean than light does, and it travels about more than 4 times faster in water than in air. So sound is a very effective carrier of information in the ocean. So it's not too surprising that marine mammals that have evolved in the ocean have evolved to use sound for all of their essential life activities: communication, navigation, foraging, using sound for all of that. So we can learn a lot about their lives just by listening. Yet this also means we have an important opportunity in ocean stewardship. If these animals are using sound for all of their life activities, we need to be careful about the noise that we introduce to the ocean, because it can interfere with their lives. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has been working on this for over a decade, but just recently they released this Ocean Noise Strategy Roadmap. And the idea is to, NOAA already protects species and habitats, and there's just this growing recognition of how important the acoustic habitat is. So they're organizing across the agency, and they're targeting national marine sanctuaries as important places to understand and manage ocean noise. So, just as an illustration of how effective sound is as a carrier of information in the ocean, I wanted to start with this. We've got here a spectrogram, and what you can see on the left side is sort of the background before, as you see the green rising up from the bottom here, that's increasing noise, sound across a range of frequencies. And one of my engineering colleagues was looking at the live spectrogram coming from our hydrophone. I'll show you where that is soon. But he sent this email to me that just real simple. The current spectrogram shows a squall headed our way, I think. So I went to the weather radar, and there was a squall right over where we're recording. So 25 minutes later, it was raining on MBARI. So here, raindrops are falling on the surface, and we're hearing them recording 3,000 feet below the surface. So just tells you how effectively sound moves in the ocean. Let's hear what that sounds like. You're going to hear some seconds of recordings from the early period of rain and then when the rain picked up. Sounds like rain. Wow. And these basic geophony, sounds of the earth, including rain and wind, they're an essential part of the ocean background sound. And, when we want to understand, what's the ultimate source of sound from these basic processes, actually it turns out that it was described very clearly by a musician. Yeah. And naturally, this musician put the description into a song. So I'm going to play a segment of that song for you, and you're going to hear two explanations. The first one is for rain. The second explanation is for wind.
Tiny bubbles, tiny bubbles.
And now, even though Don Ho explained it very clearly, I think we need an expert to help us understand what that really means.
I don't know if I can do it as clearly as Don Ho, but what you're hearing at this great depth, about 3,000 feet below the surface, is that when a raindrop actually hits the surface of the water, and some of you have probably seen slow motion films of drops hitting surfaces, and the water, when it strikes the surface, it actually pushes the water away from it and actually forms this tiny bubble. And it's actually what you're actually hearing is the bubble collapsing and stuff like that. So this is why it's such a strong sound when it hits the surface of the earth or the surface of the water. And so it is. It's all about tiny bubbles.
And with wind,
Yeah, with wind, you also get the effect of breaking waves. And you've obviously seen when whitecaps form, and again, the wave breaks. Again, and it trains these bubbles down into the surface of the ocean, and they collapse, and that's what you hear. That's where all the noise is coming from, the collapse of bubbles with wind and rain.
Thanks, John. So we're really fortunate, for a lot of reasons, to live in the Monterey Bay region. And if you want to understand whales, one of those reasons is that Monterey Bay is a really critical habitat for both foraging and living, as well as migratory paths. And, we've also, I wish I had a longer neck. So, yeah, there we go. Teamwork. So yeah, you know, there we are along the eastern northeast Pacific margin up there, and you can see off the California coast and further north there are sort of yellowish colors, and we go further south toward southern Baja and mainland Mexico, Central America, much warmer water off the coast. Well, those map pretty well onto, for example, the feeding and breeding and calving grounds, respectively, of humpback whales, for example. So we're right in the path where they're both using habitat and migrating. So putting our microphone out there gives us a great opportunity to observe their lives from one perspective. Now we're also fortunate because here in the sanctuary we have a cabled observatory, a wire that runs from the coast out to the deep sea, and it gives us a real-time, largely unlimited connection to doing science in the ocean. So on the right there you're looking at a map which includes the Mars Cable Observatory on it. Mars stands for Monterey Accelerated Research System. And so let's do a fly-in to the Mars Cable Observatory. Begins, connects to shore right in Moss Landing. And you'll see the line, the red line, sort of cross the harbor and then extend out across the northern shelf of the bay. Of course, you don't want to route a cable over a canyon, so we pass just north of Soquel Canyon there. And it extends out to the outer shelf where the topographic slope steepens on the continental slope down to Smooth Ridge, where the Mars Cable Observatory is. Right there you can see the ports where we actually plug science experiments into this main power node. And that's kind of one incredible thing in itself. If we want to do some science, we literally go down there with a remotely operated vehicle and plug it in. You know, and it works. So good bit of technology underneath that. But from John will talk later about what that cabled connection affords us as we pursue this research. This map you were just looking at, and this time we've got the sanctuary boundaries on it, of course. That SOSIS point there is a location where the Navy has listened for quite a long time and had a lot of science done there. And let's see, in the upper right, you're looking at just a 3D topographic view. And down there on Smooth Ridge, you can see the Mars node with a bunch of extension cables extending from it. And that's the way it works. We just plug into that main node, number of experiments at any given time. Now in the lower right, you're actually looking at the robotic arm of the ROV placing a tripod on the seafloor. And at the top of that tripod is the hydrophone. To give you a sense of scale, it's in my hand in the lower right picture there. But that little hydrophone produces big data, about 2 terabytes a month. That's because we need to listen across a broad frequency range, and in order to hear and study the very high frequency calls of some species, we need to record sound very rapidly. So we're sampling at more than 250,000 times each second.
So as John mentioned, there's just some advantages of being able to do this on a continuous recording basis. One of the things that it gives us is that we don't miss anything. We're out there 24/7, 365 days a year. And as John mentioned at lunch, leap years, we get 366 days out of that. So we do have complete coverage all the time. Any sound that occurs, we're going to hear it down there. And so what does that gain us? Well, one of the things it gains us is that we can study these trends on different scales. There are things that change on an hourly basis. There are things that change on a daily basis. Very often, marine mammals will vocalize at certain times of the day, depending on what they're doing, whether it's a social behavior or whether it's a finding food, foraging. We also get to see the changes of the seasons. You know, different types of whales come through here at different times of year. So there's all kinds of, and it's not just whales, it's also the prey they feed on, other fish species. So there are seasonal changes in there, and then we can also compare year-to-year changes. So, maybe if we have an El Nino year, does that make a difference on the way the animals, or how many of the animals are here? So we have all these different scales out there. The other thing about this continuous coverage is you never know when there's going to be some sort of very transient or rare event taking place out there. For example, you never know when an earthquake is going to take place, so we actually capture these kinds of events. There were some kind of, other kinds of short-lived noises that we want that would be of interest. We're there listening all the time out there. Another thing that this hydrophone in particular brings us is that not only are we listening all the time, but we're listening over a very wide range of frequencies, and there are different things that occur in different parts of that band. If you don't sample fast enough, you can't capture the high frequency events. But in low frequency events, earthquakes tend to occur in the tens of hertz region, and so you need a hydrophone that can sample that low, sensitive to those kinds of ranges. Hearing distance shipping, ship propulsion systems, the turning of propellers on these large commercial ships, we can hear those from many miles away as the ships move up and down the coast. There are certain types of marine mammals, the baleen whales, such as the fin blue whales, the humpbacks. They tend to speak in at very low frequencies. Some of them are below our normal hearing range. And then in the mid-frequency range, which is more like a kilohertz to 10 kilohertz, you also have these other types of sounds. So the dolphin whistles you'll hear later on, the pinnipeds, the seals, and so forth. We also hear still noises from the flow of flow noise over ships' hulls and wind noise that you heard earlier, and rain. And at very high frequencies that are usually above our frequency band, up in the tens of kilohertz, you hear things like the foraging clicks of dolphins or beaked whales as they use echolocation to try to find their food. Ships that pass by often try to measure the depth of water that they're in, so there's these depth sounders going off in the range of 50 kilohertz or so. And so there's different kinds of events. Acoustic communication, scientific equipment also tends to operate in these high frequencies. And so we capture all that on this one single hydrophone down at 900 meters in the ocean out there. So, one of the key things is that it's out there, because it's out there all the time. It doesn't matter whether there's storms passing by, we're going to hear it out there. So, and you can't do that necessarily if you're going out on a research vessel. Okay. So, but it's not perfect. In general, if it doesn't make a sound, PAM stands for Passive Acoustic Monitoring. That's the scientific term for sitting back and listening. Basically, you can't detect it. At least that's what we thought. And then now at the bottom, you'll see a very interesting feature that John found in the data, and he's looking at these Star Trek-shaped insignia badges down there, and he kind of asked me what that was all about, and I told him Klingons or Romulans. We pushed that theory off to the side for a little while, but what we did kind of come to the conclusion is that we also have a signal by taking energy away. So that speckled background there is kind of the general background noise that you would hear with not a whole lot of else going on. But why is that dark blue represents the signal, the noise actually going down. And we didn't expect that. So it just goes to show that, you don't know what you don't know until you go out and do something about it. And having that hydrophone down there, we're actually finding some very unexpected events as well. Was there more? I think that's right.
Thank you, John. Yeah. So staying with the background a little longer, it's good to think about, what are all the sound sources? And they're categorized in literature for both terrestrial and aquatic acoustics in three categories. First is biophony, sounds of life, anthrophony, sounds of human activities, and geophony, sounds of the earth. You've already heard rain. We'll hear an earthquake a little later from San Andreas Fault just east of here, arriving at the hydrophone. So, we talk about whales being big. It's always good to get a perspective view of that. This is your flipper. This is their fins and flippers, yeah. Up to about 100 feet. I love the whale skeleton up at Long Marine Lab. That's about 87 feet long. So I think that's enough background. People came here to hear whales, right? So let's start with the blue whale. So you'll read some facts about the animals as we go through and listen to them. Blue whale is still endangered, having had more than 90% of its population removed during the period of whaling. And, globally, the Northeast Pacific has the largest population of blue whales. So we're in a great spot to study them. Lifespan similar to ours, size, gestation similar to us. Obviously, birth announcements and sizes of parents very different. Nursing calf can gain more than my weight in a day. They forage on krill up to 3,600 kilograms in a day. So let's hear a few different types of vocalizations from blues. You've already heard this one. This is a so-called feeding call made by both males and females. Thanks to Glastonbury for the subwoofers. And this is a bee call made only by males. It comes in two parts. They're very low frequency and long, two long segments. And these bee calls in particular really dominate the low frequency soundscape. It's one of the most prominent sounds you'll find. And this is an A call also made only by males. You'll also hear in this recording some ship noise in the background, which kind of introduces this, what we were talking about earlier, and beginning to understand human impacts on communication. So, we introduced what blue whales eat. They forage almost exclusively on krill, and they can eat up to, I think it's 40 million in a day, and they can find krill. They want to find krill in very dense patches because it's a really efficient way to forage. Catch per unit effort is high. And so here's a beautiful image from the sanctuary showing a couple of blue whales near the surface, and these reddish swirls you see are krill swarms near the surface. So they're feeding on those. And when they do feed, of course, they fill with water and food and squeeze out the water. And there's a beautiful real example of baleen on one of the exhibits out there. And the other place where they find really dense aggregations of krill is along the continental shelf break, where the gently sloping shelf turns to the more steeply sloped slope and canyon walls here in this case. And so all along here, you'll find very dense krill swarms. And this is work by Don Kroll and others from UC Santa Cruz, just showing the locations over a number of years where blue whales were sighted. And what you can see is most of the sightings are along that continental shelf break. So this contour here is this. So that says a lot right there, that they're spending time at the shelf break. This, by the way, is something I added, just an indication of where we're listening. So good place. Not only are there a lot of blue whales in this region, we're listening in a good spot to hear them. But this study also had tags on animals to evaluate to what depths were the animals diving. And what they found in looking at both animal depth and the distribution of these krill, euphausids, was that the whales were spending their time at the same depth where you can find these extremely dense food patches. And we've used the remotely operated vehicle here, this is Ventana, to study these krill swarms, going down and sort of surgically sampling different populations, looking at how juveniles and adults and different species segregate on the shelf. But this will give you a whale's eye view of what that would be like. I could swim around with my mouth open and catch those. And when we think about this endangered species, what are some of the dangers? Well, one, of course, is ship strikes. And this study highlights, they use tags on animals which basically record the conditions around the animals and the behavior of the animals over a period of time. And this tag study showed basically that in the presence of large ships, the blue whales didn't take any horizontal evasive maneuvers. They just slowly descended in the water column. And that's, that just kind of says that their behavior is not tuned to avoid that threat, because there's still a lot of ship underneath the water, for example. So they are prone to injury that way. Was there something else we wanted to say about this? Yeah, there was something else.
I was just going to mention in here, one of the issues, and we'll see it later in some of the later slides, is that sound doesn't always travel in a straight line, the way you think about flashing a flashlight, and it travels more or less in a straight line. But the environment on the west coast here, the sound energy that's generated by the ship does move forward and then refracts downward. And I'm going to leave it at that for now, because that may be one of the reasons why they're not reacting so much, because in a very short distance away from the ship, the sound energy that's being generated by the ship is actually going down into the ocean rather than straight across, unless there's certain other conditions that come up that mix the top layer. I'll leave it at that.
That was it. Thanks. Okay, and then one other issue is, of course, noise. This is another study, actually led by Jeremy Goldbogen, who's at Stanford Hopkins. And it examined response of blue whales to a simulated Navy sonar. And the short story is that when the animal was exposed to the noise, it ceased feeding. It was feeding at the time, and turned away from the noise source and swam directly away from it. So there's a clear example where a technology, a tag on the animal, helps us to understand impacts.
All right, so we thought we'd run over a little bit of some of the basics, and this is related to what I was just saying a few minutes ago. So how does the sound energy get to the hydrophone? And I want you to try to understand why the hydrophone is actually located in a very ideal situation. If you had to pick a place to put one, this would be the best place to put it, or one of the better places to put it. All right, well, Snell's law basically said, and Snell's law was derived back in the 1600s, right? So we've known a little bit about the way waves travel. Sound waves traveling through the ocean will always refract towards the slower sound speed, okay? And in the ocean, there are basically three parameters that affect sound speed: temperature, salinity, and pressure. And so sound speed will increase with an increase in any of those parameters there. And so what that means is that in the upper ocean, where we have relatively warm water, you have fast sound speed, and so the down, as you get down further, where the temperature is not changing very much, you have pressure increasing because of the weight of the water above it. And so you have these two areas of fast sound speed with a minimum found at around 800 meters or so. And that just happens to be about the depth of the hydrophone that's out there. So what does that mean? That means, well, you know, any energy that's above the minimum sound speed will tend to refract down, and then as it passes down below, it'll tend to refract back up. And so it actually kind of traps that sound energy for great distances. And another important parameter is that low-frequency sound tends to be more transparent. So low-frequency sounds, like from ships, from baleen whales, will travel greater distances than high-frequency sound in there. So some of these low-frequency sounds may come from hundreds of miles away to get to our hydrophone, even thousands of miles away. So those are kind of important. So the hydrophone is in this natural sound channel, and the low-frequency sounds will, as I said, will travel great distances. So things like earthquake, T waves. So in terms of earthquakes, you have the P waves, the primary waves that travel through the Earth. The S waves, which travel, they arrive after the primary waves. They also travel through the Earth. But then there's these tertiary waves, or T waves, that travel through the water and actually get to our hydrophone there. So the sound, and they arrive much later. But again, we can hear those from from a great distance away up there. Like I say, commercial shipping sounds will travel through that sound channel as well, and as well as the marine mammal calls out there. If you hear high-frequency sounds near our hydrophone, it's probably locally produced. So the wind sounds that you heard earlier, the rain, that's probably very locally produced, which is why as the squall line passes over the hydrophone, the intensity goes up, and then it passes by, it fades away pretty quickly out there. And so those kinds of sounds tend to be diminished fairly quickly. So that tells us one of the reasons why we've got a great location out here. And what I'm going to show you is that yellow line that you see running from Moss Landing out to the deep water out there is where I'm going to show you a typical acoustic path that runs from the relatively shallow water out to the deep water, and just give you an idea of how the sound travels here. So this picture here shows you the location of the Mars hydrophone and how sound would get to that hydrophone. And you can see off to the left there, as you go out into the deep ocean, it gives you an idea of how that sound might get there from great distances and how the sound is actually trapped in there. So typical low-frequency sound from a ship, coming from great distances means that we can hear these things. And that may actually be helpful for the way the whales communicate. We don't know that for sure, but low-frequency sounds tend to be social-type calls, and that may be one of the ways they communicate very well. If you look to the right side, where we go towards Moss Landing, where the water gets shallower, you can see that there's the bottom starts interacting with the sound and starts absorbing it and taking it away. So we don't get quite the range in the shallow water as that we get in the deeper water out there. But that dome that you more or less see, that bright yellow, red area right there, shows you that downward refracting energy, so that if you're near the surface around the hydrophone, you can see that sound would get directly to that hydrophone out to a little distance. But then if you're near the surface, like a ship passing by a whale that's near the surface, there's a shadow zone on either side there. And so maybe about 10 kilometers away, you really don't hear that sound, and then suddenly it increases in there. So it just gives you an idea how that sound gets there. It's not, just everybody hears everything from every place in there. There are, because of the environment, certain paths that are a little bit more robust in terms of getting sound to the hydrophone, and then there are places. But the lower the hydrophone in general, the longer horizontal range you get nearby the hydrophone. So that's another good reason why having that phone at 900 meters is a great location, an opportunity.
And the second largest animal on Earth is the fin whale. They make a very different, very low frequency sound, also low frequency. And this is, I'll just play it. It's actually lower frequency. That's sped up by a factor of 2 to help a subwoofer represent it. Yeah, so also an endangered species, similar lifespan as we, almost as big as the blue whale, similar gestation period. They're somewhat known for their speed. Sometimes they've been called the greyhound of the sea, able to cruise at about 25 miles an hour. And whereas the blue whale almost exclusively eats krill, and anything that unfortunately gets in the way of that. They're a little more diverse diet with fins. They eat crustaceans, but also squid and fish. Oh, yeah.
So you heard those 3 pulses in there. So the fin whales, that tends to go on for long periods of time. I mean, we're not talking 3 and then quiet for a while. Those pulses are quite regularly spaced, and they may go on for hours, I guess, so you just hear that constant pulsing and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. In fact, Mark Fisher here in the audience isolated our first recordings of fin whale pulses, and it was December 31st, 2015. He was looking to listen to a container vessel, but there was this fin whale for 13 hours straight just pulsing. It's like it's a metronome. It's also a metronome, biological metronome. And so we've got this mountain of data, 2 terabytes a month, and these 2 species, because their vocalizations dominate the soundscape at the low frequency end, we can look at sound energy at the frequencies that they're vocalizing, at the pitch they're putting out, and get an acoustic index in a way, a measure of, let's say, just the average for the month. Do we hear a lot of sound energy where they're vocalizing? And that's what you're looking at in a time series format here from fall of 2015 up till last month. And the blues are represented in blue. What you would, one thing to notice is that in all of these years, even though we started in late July, August in each year is the first time we begin to hear blues and fins. In these first 2 years, we heard blue whales for a couple of months before hearing any fin whales, and then blue whales only for a month before hearing, fin whales, before that was rising up. Other patterns that are clear to see are the much higher sound energy from fin whales in this year and this year compared to the first. And what we do with these time series, in addition to getting very accurate about quantifying their calls, is to relate that to environmental data. So what was different about the environment in this year that fin whales were apparently less prevalent in the local soundscape? There was the warm blob, which would show up on the Weather Channel, the very unusually warm ocean conditions in the Northeast Pacific, for example. And so that's underway. Now, this is just a very simple measure saying how much sound energy is at this frequency that blue whales are vocalizing. We can also look at it another way and say, every time I hear a blue whale bee call, I'm going to count it. And that's really hard for a person to do, to sift through these mountains of data. So we're working with methods generally termed machine learning. And the short point I want to make with this, first of all, that Donnell Klein, software engineer extraordinaire, led this development using Google's technology. And already it's up and running, and it's very accurately and precisely identifying individual calls. So what you see here is blue whales peaking 2 months before fin whales. It's very consistent with the other measure, but this is more reliable. So now the humpback. There are a number of humpback populations, some of which are endangered. However, the population out in our region is not. Lifespan up to about 80 years. Size is a good bit smaller than the first 2 we looked at. And one of the striking things is how agile and acrobatic they are. And you can kind of see how different this pectoral fin is scaled relative to the body. compared to the blues and fins. And those much larger pectoral fins allow them to be very acrobatic. And of course, we get treated with their acrobatics above the water surface as well. They also eat krill as well as schooling fish. And not necessarily in this region, but in some places they use bubble nets for foraging, where the whale down deep will release air, forms a rising curtain of bubbles, and that keeps the fish contained as they swim up through the middle with their mouths open at the right time. It is called song, as originally described by Payne and McVeigh in the 60s, and just meaning a rhythmic, repeated sequence of sounds. And so what you're going to initially hear is just a short clip, 3 examples of phrases from songs, just to give you a sense of the range, the pitch range of their vocalizations, which is astounding for an animal that large. Scales. So in that last segment, you were also hearing something that sounded like a ticking clock. Those were echolocation clicks from a sperm whale. And that, yeah, and again, Mark Fisher, where are you? There he is, thank you. Mark really dug into this mountain of data to find the sperm whale vocalizations. We'll isolate those a little later. But these songs are organized with song units, the shortest individual sound we can distinguish by listening, which are organized into phrases that may be repeated in themes, which form a song, and then that whole thing is repeated in a song session. So let's zoom into a part of a song session. Oh, next. First, point I want to make with this is that it's helpful sometimes when we're studying ocean sound to see it, to analyze it visually. And what you're going to see here is a scrolling spectrogram. I would explain a spectrogram, but you're going to be able to understand it just by watching it scroll in. It's going to come in at the right side. And this axis here is frequency, low-pitched sounds, higher-pitched sounds. And then time will be, of course, evident as the scrolling spectrogram. Obviously, the warmer colors represent more sound energy at that frequency. Sorry about that. So Donnell Klein, who I mentioned earlier, also developed, this is going to be on YouTube Tuesday, live listening to Monterey Bay. So it'll just be continuously streaming. You'll be about 20 minutes behind real time. And sometimes you'll tune in and it'll be quiet, but be patient. Because when you tune in other times, it's magical cacophony. Yeah, you'll hear wind noise all the time. Thank you. What is it that causes wind noise? Tiny bubbles. So, just to give you a sense of the what a spectrogram, you were looking at a scrolling spectrogram, brighter colors mean more sound energy. Here's a slightly larger view of a whole day with 1 hour isolated and zoomed in down here. You can see blue whales and their harmonics, fin whales, other humpback whale song here, and then as we go later in the day, well, there's a passing ship and another one. So visually, we can get a very clear sense of the soundscape, and you can browse to as long as your eyes can handle it, hour by hour, all of the data. It's online on the MBARI website.
And the changing wind background.
Oh yeah.
No, I was just going to point out, sorry, you can see the change in the wind here. You can see how it's nice and bright here, but obviously during this time of day, the wind calmed down. So you see all that happening at the same time. Should I sing Tiny Bubbles again?
So, I've been thinking of the humpback as the oceanic jazz singer because, the blues and there's the harmonics of the blue call, fins here, repeated, consistent sounds. Then you get up in here, and here's one humpback song. Here's another. So 2 complete songs. They're improvising. And they really are. They're learning from each other. They're repeating the songs, improvising on what they learn. And it's the males that sing.
Why not the females?
Fair question. I think it's because, as we see very often, males are always trying to impress and then figure out ways to do that. And this is some work by NOAA researchers, Barlow and Forney, showing visual surveys. Okay, we can listen from this deep sea listening node. What do visual surveys tell us? These gray lines are ship survey tracks, and over a 5-year period of surveys, what this data showed is that, again, we're in a great location to be studying humpbacks. This is where their abundance estimates are highest, off Central California. And of course, visual surveys don't have to happen from a boat. If the fish come in close, so do the whales. This is MBARI, where I work, and there have been periods where whale watching from the beach. Similar to the blues and fins, we want to study the whole time series and understand variation in the presence and activity of these whales. And so what you're looking at here is a time series a little shorter, from August 2015 up through mid-2017. And what you'll notice right away is that here's summer and song is absent. In each of these 2, what I might call song seasons, most of the humpback song is happening in November through January. 75% of the total for this whole period, and 78% of the total for this whole period. So most of the singing is happening November, December, January. Of course, this is the time of year when they're headed to the lower latitude breeding and calving grounds. And, song is important in that context. And here's one more angle on that same data. It shows how song length changes moving from fall into winter. January, of course, is that last month where you have the large amount of song. You can see the song length increasing. So songs are getting longer and more complex, as would be appropriate if you wanted to practice and impress out on the breeding grounds. Now, the whale for whom this Whalefest was begun, I think, this time of year, honoring the return of the gray whales during their migration. Thanks to Tatiana Margolina, colleague of John Joseph's, for identifying this call. I was looking through the spectrograms, and I kept seeing these calls in a range I didn't know anything about, so I sent her an example. Right away, she knew what it was, and it's a gray whale M3 call. There's also an M1 call in there. So the M1 calls will sound like a sudden gunshot or door slam. The other ones are the answering calls. And that was actually condensed. That was the number of calls I heard in a 10-minute segment. I just took out the quiet time so you could get a sense of what that sounds like. And now going on to, we've gone from baleen now to toothed whales. Here we've got cachalot or sperm whale. It is listed as vulnerable, and it is the largest of the toothed whales and the largest toothed predator on Earth. Second deepest diving mammal. The deepest diving mammal we'll hear soon after this. Adults up to about 20 meters, so larger than a humpback. Lifespans up to about 70 years. Fairly long gestation, 14 to 16 months, and lactation, can be nursing for nearly 3.5 years or so. Largest brain of any animal on Earth. That, of course, is key to their ability to echolocate. They have a massive head up to about a third of their body, a lot of oil in it, and they have that ability to use their skull as a reflective dish to focus sound and, shine that flashlight John talked about. Where are the squid in this completely dark ocean? Well, they can use sound to determine that and find their food. So you can hear variation in the inter-click interval. How frequently are they clicking? And generally, they speed it up when they're getting closer to their target. They're increasing the information feedback to zero in on that prey. One brief story from a friend of Mark Fisher and I, Bryant Austin. First time he ever went diving, free diving with sperm whales, when he was approached by the animal, it sent echolocation clicks, and they are the loudest sounds made by whales, but they're very focused. And so when they're focused on your body, as Brian put it, every cell in his body was vibrating with the sound of this. And then the sperm whale went down for a deep dive. It came up with a squid tentacle hanging out of its mouth, and it went, spit it to him. With sound, they can see inside your body. Did the animal see his stomach was empty? Look at you eat, Yeah. So, but he's had some amazing experiences, including the first time he encountered a humpback whale, and he lets the whales come to him on their terms. Then he takes very high-resolution photographs, blows them up to life size. Magnificent. And so he was interacting with a humpback whale calf. Very curious animal swimming around him, lifting up its pectoral fin to avoid hitting him in the head. And then he feels something on his right shoulder. That's mom's 12-foot pectoral fin. I'm here. So very intelligent, gentle giants. This is, now let's turn to the beaked whale, the deepest diving marine mammal. As Brandon Southall has described to me, we can't think of their physiology in terms of ours because they're mostly spending their time very deep, and they occasionally come up and surface. So, of course, it's very difficult to study them with visual methods, and listening is key. Another person, Dan Costa, describing elephant seals, said, we don't so much consider it diving behavior as surfacing behavior. So there are 22 species, very, very many species, difficult to study. And, to nearly 3,000 meters, about 2 miles they can dive, remaining down for more than 2 hours. They mainly forage on squid, but also fish. Adults can be up to about 13 meters. And oldest known was about 84 years. Okay. Oh, actually got to read that. Oh yeah, okay. So let's hear, the thing about the beaked whale click is it's too high frequency for our hearing system, so we have to slow it down. There we go. That's at 1/3 real speed. This is again from Mark Fisher. Now, even though we're focused on whales at Whalefest, we're going to touch on smaller cousins. And dolphins, of course, we see forming fairly large groups at sea. So we're going to listen to a group initially. This is Pacific white-sided dolphins. And to translate that conversation, that's my most frequent answer. I wish I could get into their heads, know what they're thinking. So this is just an individual dolphin, and I don't know what species, but give you a sense of individual dolphin clicks, echolocation. And then, of course, they're not out there, each species in its own area. Here's an example clip just of a number of species. At the same time, you'll hear Pacific white-sided dolphins, sea lions barking. I didn't know they barked underwater until I started listening. A humpback whale grunting. Then some mystery mammal sounds that sound somewhat like a meow, and blowing raspberries. And now just you've heard one voice of Earth, the rain. Let's hear an earthquake. This map here shows the location of a series of, what do they call it, a microswarm of earthquakes registered by USGS. And in this plot here, you're looking at about a 25 minute period. And everywhere there's a line and a triangle is an earthquake occurrence measured by seismometer. And the triangle indicates the magnitude of the earthquake. What you can see is higher magnitude earthquake, more color up here. This is the sound energy recorded by the hydrophone offshore right here from those earthquakes. So, strong earthquake, strong sound, weak earthquake, weak sound. And so let's listen to the strongest one in this series. And again, I had this, to hear it, you kind of need to speed it up. This is at 5 times true speed. What I think is kind of interesting about that is it started as the earth shaking, got translated into an acoustic wave in the ocean, recorded on our microphone. Now it's back to shaking the earth. And lastly, just wanted to point you to a resource that I found really useful. Brandon Southall pointed me to it, Discovery of Sound in the Sea. It's a website largely sponsored by the University of Rhode Island, but it has a lot of wonderful information about sound in the sea. As I mentioned, Tuesday we're going to be releasing live listening as well as a listening room app where you can say, I want to hear what a blue whale sounds like, and you'll be able to select that and have access to these recordings. If you want to hear the low frequency sounds, you'll need a good sound system with a subwoofer or really good headphones, but nonetheless it'll be there. And then last word is stewardship. You know, what listening in the ocean these last few years has taught me is something that has been an awareness that's been growing in the environmental science and management community, and that is that the ocean soundscape is really critical to ocean stewardship, understanding and protecting it. So we thank you for making this. We'd be glad to answer questions if we have time. Two questions.
How can we prevent oil drilling?
Okay. I'm going to have to study up on that. Yes.
Are you able to tell, maybe by the tag whales, that certain species seek out a certain level in the ocean in order to vocalize?
That's a good question. I have seen data that says, for example, a number of the baleen whale species that you heard would be vocalizing at depths of, say, tens of meters.
They use tag data.
And they use tag data to determine that, yeah. Yes?
Are the sounds coming through their blowholes like a reed instrument, or are they also doing like clicks lowering in their larynx, and somehow that gets out?
Yeah. Yeah, like you and me, they're moving air through tissues that vibrate, and yet, other than sea lions barking, mostly they're keeping that air internal. And so they have a larynx-like structure, not so much vocal cords, but tissues that vibrate. And they also might have, I guess it's called a pharyngeal sac, another place to store air, so they can move the air one way across those tissues and make sound, and then move it back. So, without releasing it, yeah.
Kind of like a harmonica, sucking in and blowing out on a harmonica?
In the sense that they can make sound both ways, that's somewhat harmonica-like. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and they also use other parts of the body. I mean, there's, you saw the sperm whale. That was an important thing to be able to focus. They also, sound does travel through some of their jaw structure as well. So it's a little bit more complicated than the way we, maybe, I don't know if it's more complicated than us or not, but I would say this bone structure also helps a lot.
How great a distance do we think some of those, like the blue whale, how far can they communicate with another whale?
You know, in the literature, you'll see 500 kilometers. So low frequency sound travels much farther, as John mentioned. And if that sound is contained in the sound channel, like that helps to carry it even further. So. Blue whale, 500 kilometers away. You can hear him. So, the short story. Tom.
Do they use their tongue? Do they have a tongue?
Absolutely giant tongue. And do they use it in sound production or moving air? Good question.
That's a good question.
We need a tag that goes inside the mouth without getting swallowed. You design tags, Tom. Are you going to get on that? Tom has designed tags for great white sharks to get video footage at just the right time, for example, when they exhibit a certain behavior as indicated by sensors they're carrying. So anyway.
Is there a plan to put another hydrophone somewhere else?
This fall we're going to put out, so this is an omnidirectional hydrophone. The sound can come from any direction and we don't know what direction. Working with John and Kevin Smith at the Naval Postgraduate School and others, we're going to put out a directional acoustic sensing system. So we'll at least know the direction from which the sound came. Those blue whales are up the coast, down the coast, offshore. And that'll really help us do good research.